So I think we can go ahead and get started. We have a good show out tonight, and this event will be recorded for those if you want to share it out to your friends or if you want folks to hear some more about some Muscogee Creek history and culture and all the wonderful things that RaeLynn will have to share with us tonight. But to get started, I'll just do a general round of show to give some background on what we'll be going over. So I'll go a little bit into WAWA's background and sort of our work on going beyond land acknowledgement, and then kick it off right into the Q&A. So let's see. Should I hit record, Anna Marie, or do you want to go ahead? I don't know if
it is already recording.
Okay,
Yep.
great. I don't know if I got a little alert thing. Okay, cool. Sounds good. So hi everybody. It looks like maybe like half and half split between WAWA folks and other folks in our community. So my name is Janelle Wright. I am the Environmental Justice Programs Manager at West Atlanta Watershed Alliance, joined by RaeLynn Butler, who I will introduce a little bit later on. So to start, for those who don't know, West Atlanta Watershed Alliance, we're located at the Outdoor Activity Center. We're in the Oakland City neighborhood, and we steward 26 acres, or about 26 acres of a nature preserve old growth forest. So if you go into our space, it's situated in the physical neighborhood. We also bump along Bush Mountain neighborhood as well. And so within those acreage, there's trails, about 2 miles of trails. Folks walk along, and then this also extends up into the historic Black Cracker practice field, where the Negro League practiced years ago. And then we, along that space as well, and connected to that space is, again, the Bush Mountain neighborhood, but also the historic Hartnett Community Garden that we steward, and I am partnered with Partner in Residence with Patchwork City Farms. And so in this entire, that covers essentially this entire acreage and space. Also, the neighborhoods are historically Black, one of the smallest historically Black neighborhoods in the city of Atlanta. And there's a lot of culture and history in the spaces that we serve, but really to kind of go back into how we began on the sort of the forefront of some environmental justice leadership and community organizing back in 1998, when we officially became a nonprofit, and on the roots of this work specific to the stormwater issues from the combined sewer overflows and separation of that. And then along with this, really this environmental justice work, over the years, up until really now present, it has extended into environmental education initiatives, environmental stewardship in the space, and really all of these, we call them the 3 E's, but they're really interconnected in many ways. And so a common thread in that I'm sure will come up in some of our conversation today is this placekeeping, which is really this intentional effort to ground community in this maintenance of the cultural, historical background of the space, and its meaning, and what that connection is for residents, for folks who visit the space, and for folks to establishing meaning into the and history into the space. So again, with those 3 E's, that environmental justice, environmental stewardship, and environmental education, through environmental justice, a lot of our initiatives are focused on this trifecta of insecurity. So food insecurity, energy burden. We're in Neighborhood Planning Unit S, one of the largest energy burdened neighborhoods in the city, or neighborhood planning units in the city of Atlanta, which is a combination of neighborhoods. And then also focusing on housing insecurity as well through initiatives. And a lot of this equity-based work is not, it's not, fulfilled without these intentional partnerships with several folks. So we have, this partnership that we've stewarded across the past year, when, extending now through this conversation today, but also partnerships with the Proctor Creek Stewardship Council, the Atlanta Watershed Learning Network, MPUS, they have a Quality of Life Committee, who has really been begun some of that work from the the initial organizing of the neighborhood, that historical neighborhood, and then Patrick City Farms and many, many others. So to sort of extend into the beginnings of our conversation around going beyond land acknowledgement, back in 2021, we began our partnership with Muscogee Consulting firm. They're an Indigenous consulting firm led by Shanae Bullock. And in this, through her guidance, we had our inaugural Living Indigenous Experience and Cultural Conversation. And this was really a beautiful opportunity of storytelling, cultural demonstration through food, and the food and the ecological systems. There was dancing, singing, and again, it allowed us to create a space for remembering the folks who have in the original habitants of Atlanta, of the space, of the Outdoor Activity Center, the Muscogee Creek people. And so, yeah, this was this kickoff. And in many ways, this kind of began what and leading to like now, and kind of how we're going beyond land acknowledgement into 2023 and beyond. So what going beyond land acknowledgement really means is to recognize that, we're talking a little bit about this prior to folks joining in, that having these verbal statements and even physical signs, while they are important markers of land acknowledgement, that it really takes some intentional community-based building, intentional connection to Indigenous communities, to know how we should, support folks who have lived in the space and folks who have ancestral connections to the space. So this relationship and base building is really continuous again, and we're excited to move forward in this. Just a few months ago, back in December, a few of us on the team were able to attend the Okmulgee celebration in Macon, Georgia, at the Okmulgee Mounds National Historical Park. I again just realized that RaeLynn and I myself had met there, and I guess I didn't put the connection together, but it's beautiful that we were able to have this conversation again today. And so, to really extend on that conversation, and really all of this breadth of history that can be made more aware through events and such as these. So there was also significance in that event, just to learn about this, going from Ocmulgee, Georgia, to Ocmulgee in Oklahoma, where the Muscogee Creek people were forcibly removed to, and learning some of that history as well in this conversation, as well as meeting other members of the Muscogee Creek Nation, who we will hopefully hear from later in the year and for future events. And so that's one other point I would like to make with this partnership with Muscogee Consulting, and finalizing this land acknowledgement sign. Again, we are excited to have the physical sign in the space at the Outdoor Activity Center, so our visitors every year can see that kind of the significance of the Muscogee people in the space, and sort of that essentially they, while removed, there's still a strong presence there. And then also having this opportunity to have future events, such as a lecture series, and then through maybe this partnership, kind of discussing what other ways we can show up and really fulfill some of this culture and place keeping at the Outdoor Activity Center. So I will shift a little bit to introduce RaeLynn Butler. She is our guest for today, and I'm excited to have this conversation, and also welcoming everyone to, put their questions into the chat for Anne-Marie to review, and so we can get those highlighted throughout as well. So RaeLynn Butler is a citizen of the Muscogee Creek Nation and serves as the manager of the Historic and Cultural Preservation Department at the Muscogee Creek Nation. She's a proud member of Peach Ground, Ceremonial Ground, and is Raccoon Clan. RaeLynn earned a Master of Science degree from Purdue University and a Bachelor of Science degree from Haskell Indian Nations University. She currently oversees the Muscogee Nation's efforts to promote, protect, and preserve Muscogee cultural resources and history, and works with the department staff to document Muscogee sacred places, traditional cultural properties, tribal towns, cemeteries, churches, and battlefield sites in the Muscogee Creek Nation 12 state area of interest, which includes the Muscogee homelands in the Southeast and their current reservation in Oklahoma. Her office consults with federal agencies for compliance with the National Historic Preservation Act. Her team also provides cemetery cleanup services for citizens, archaeological surveys for the nation, including ground penetrating radar, cultural outreach, genealogy, and they maintain the Muscogee Creek Nation National Library and Archives. So their office has successfully repatriated and reburied more than 890 ancestors and over 72,000 funerary objects under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. Thank you so much for providing that beautiful bio, and we'll get started on our first question. So the first question I have for tonight, I guess I do want to give you an opportunity to say a few words yourself before we get started about your background.
Thank you. Hishje Estongo, RaeLynn Butler, Jalho Jefkedos, Almalegida, Wakogi, Almadowa, Pecan Tallahassee. My name is RaeLynn Butler, and I said that I'm from the Raccoon Clan and that I'm from Peach Ground, tribal town. And in Muscogee, Peach, you say Pagana. And so you guys in Atlanta should know, because there's so many things called peach, peach tree, this and that. And, there used to be a peach tree village outside of Atlanta too, that was part of Muscogee, important Muscogee village. Yeah, it's neat that I come from a place called Peach Ground. And I'm not sure exactly if they had roots in Georgia, but I know when we were removed from our homelands that our town was in Alabama on the Coosa River. But I'm really grateful to be here today. I've been working for the nation for 7.5 years, and it's been just working through the nation, able to visit our homelands. I had never been to Georgia before that, and so it's been such a honor and privilege to work for my tribe, work for our tribal government, and to get to come back and see how beautiful these homelands are and see where our ancestors used to live. So but I really appreciate the work that you all are doing and organizing, in your community, taking care of your community, and for inviting me and wanting to learn more about our tribal history in the area.
Thank you so much. So I actually shipped into, you were starting to give a little bit of background into the work you've done or began to do for 7 years, but can you tell us a little bit more about your role as the Historic and Cultural Preservation Department Manager for the Muscogee Creek Nation?
Sure. We are one department, we're in the Historic and Cultural Preservation Department, and we're one of about 80 departments that operate at the tribal government. And we're located here in Okmulgee, Oklahoma. It's about 40 miles south of Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is the second largest city in the state. And we have about 16 employees, and we have several different cultural programs. But folks, if they came to visit us, would come into the library and archives, where we have every book ever written about our tribe. We have a lot of historical documents about treaties. We have a lot of information about tribal citizenship and census rolls and things like that. And then we also have our cemetery crew, and we help clean up family cemeteries. A lot of Muscogee people are buried in private cemeteries that were once located near their home or allotment, family allotment. And we have a unique burial practices where we put grave houses on top of the grave. So it's a little bit different than a marker that you might see in a regular cemetery. And because of that, a lot of those are not allowed in a public cemetery that you might see in a community. So these are very rural cemeteries that haven't been documented by the state, and so they need a lot of care. Most of them are located on private lands now. There is a state law in Oklahoma that says if you have a cemetery that's like that, you have a right to go in and visit, during normal visitation hours. So we really try to help document where these are located and help citizens clean them up. Sometimes they're 10 years overgrown. And so we have a 4-man crew that can help cut down trees or clear brush and fit cemeteries. A lot of times right now they're in farmers' fields or cattle ranching fields. And so animals are coming in and knocking over the monuments and things. And so the current landowners don't really take care of them very well. So that's, we want to care, those are sacred places to us, and we want to try to take care of those historic cemeteries. And we've documented over 330 of those on our reservation in Oklahoma. And so that's a big part of what we do too. We also have archaeology program where we do surveys. So if our tribe wants to build a new health clinic, or they're looking at putting up a grocery store, we would go out and survey the land and make sure that there's no artifacts or evidence of other cultural materials. We have only lived on these lands in Oklahoma about 180 years, and we know that there were tribes who lived here before us. And so if we start uncovering artifacts or cultural items, they might belong to the Osage tribe or the Wichita or the Caddo. And, so we do surveys to ensure that we're not doing harm on these lands out of respect for the other people who used to live here. And, in Atlanta, I imagine any artifacts found in there are most likely related to our people, simply because those are the lands we occupied for thousands of years before we had to leave. But we perform that kind of work. And then one of the things that keep us the most busy is we consult with federal agencies under the National Historic Preservation Act. And you all may be familiar with that. You mentioned there's a historic neighborhood. Having that designation means that this is something that's 45 years and older and has a designation under this law that, can this be listed on the National Register of Historic Places? And if a federal agency or federal landowner, like a military installation or the Forest Service or National Park Service, is going to build or expand something on those federal lands, then they're required to consult with tribes who once lived there, and they're given an opportunity to review the project. So maybe it's just a new road through their land. Well, they would be required to do archaeological survey work as well to make sure that if there are artifacts found, are those artifacts eligible to be on the National Register? Or, is the site significant? They have to make a determination with the tribes. So, you may not think that there's that many federal agencies, but there are so many. And a lot of the highways that are built with federal money. And so those kind of surveys are required. We're reviewing projects in 12 states that encompass the footprint of the Muscogee people. Our primary lands are in Alabama and Georgia and parts of Florida. But we know that our people, those were documented lands. Before European contact, we were all over the Southeast, into the Carolinas, into Tennessee, and beyond, hunting, fishing, trading, doing all kinds of things. So we were only documented on these other lands at a certain time. And we want to ensure that basically we care a lot about what's in the ground and the cultural resources that are present. And, they're non-renewable. Once you destroy a mound, you can't get it back. Once you destroy a site or go through it, there's no turning back. And so if there are those sites found, we want to protect them. And we're reviewing thousands of projects a year under this law. And one of the other things we do is we do NAGPRA work, which NAGPRA may not be that common knowledge to folks, but it's a law that gives tribes the right to reclaim and to regain ownership of items that have been stolen or taken from our graves that are at museums, that are at universities that people have been studying. And, it's I can talk a lot about this, but it's just unreal the number of Native American and even African American and Black graves that have been looted over time by academic people, by the government. When they built the dams, when they built the infrastructure of the United States, these graves were found and sent to museums. And, at the time, and this really happened in the 1940s and 50s, but there was no laws that say you should reach out to the communities or what tribes do these people belong to. And so they sit on shelves today. And NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, gives the right for a tribe to make a claim and try to get them back. And so we work with a lot of museums and institutions in the Southeast to try to repatriate those items and rebury them. We feel that there is, this is a human rights issue, regardless of anybody's race or political status, that everyone deserves to be at rest. And they were buried by people who loved them, and we want to ensure that we can help get them back and at rest. And so that's another aspect of the work that we do, which is not always easy, and it's a big responsibility, but we feel that we want to try to get it done in our generation so that the next generation doesn't have to worry about this. And, just an example, one institution has over 10,000 remains from one site, a mound site in Alabama. And so you can imagine how hard it is just to go to one funeral, but to prepare to rebury 10,000 people, it's just unfathomable. And it's something, that is very tough job that we have to try to help bring these ancestors back to rest.
Thank you so much for, I guess, sharing the breadth of all of the work. I have just so many thoughts and questions, really, because there's a lot of nuance around everything. But for the sake of time, I think I'll go to the next question I have, and then maybe revisit some of my thoughts a little bit later. But thank you so much. So in earlier, I was kind of discussing some of that transition and the removal from Ocmulgee to Okmulgee. And my next question is, can you tell us more about what that initiative was and some of the success, or that initiative is right now, and what some of the successes around it are so far?
Sure. The tribe has been in works to kind of declare Macon, Georgia to be like our sister city, because we brought that name with us here, Ocmulgee, Georgia, or the Ocmulgee River, and that's along Macon, Georgia. It was such an important place to us, and it's thought to have been like the seat of our confederacy and where we had operated our tribal government, where we would come to have all of our allies in kinship towns in groups and come and meet there and have a national council and make decisions and negotiate on how to handle these foreign powers coming into our territory, and how to take care of a community, how to work with one another. And, so again, it's such an important place that, and also it's named after a group of people. At one time, the Okmulgee were a tribal town, and we brought that name with the people here to where we are today, and decided to name our capital, tribal capital of our nation, Ocmulgee, after the importance and significance of that place in Georgia, our homelands. Before it was a state of Georgia. But yeah, and so I would say that it's really been an effort, maybe since the 70s, that the tribe, 1970s, that the tribe has slowly kind of reconnected to those lands and came back. Part of it was being invited by the National Park Service to come back. But I will tell you that it wasn't always safe to come back. There are stories, and actually we are aware of laws that were on the books in the state of Georgia, even until recently, that said, any Creek Indian that comes in that doesn't have permission by the governor could be hung. And of course, that went on to the law back in the 1820s, back when we were being forcibly removed out of the state of Georgia, or out of the territory that became Georgia, that there were laws then that said any of you that come back could be hung without permission. But the government did such a good job at removing our people, they didn't take that off the books for I mean, the previous manager, Joyce Bear, who was one of the first ones to kind of start our department and start working with people in the homelands, had mentioned that law, and how they were scared that could we be in trouble or get caught from coming back. And so, but I think the partnership with the park really helped ease people, and people were more comfortable, and to where larger and larger numbers from the tribe would come out and visit the Ocmulgee mounds in Macon. And over time, this year was the 30th anniversary of the Ocmulgee celebration, to highlight Indigenous people's history of the land and culture. And so it's been great. I believe maybe more than 10 years ago, the tribe actually did a Ocmulgee to Ocmulgee bike ride, where a group of people who are very athletic and able to do that type of commute rode their bikes from Ocmulgee to Ocmulgee, and just to reconnect and to celebrate that link between our history. But yeah, I think it's really neat that the tribe has been so involved in reconnecting. And today, there's so many efforts. We have Muscogee citizen who lives in Macon and has really helped push the community, the city, to acknowledge Muscogee history, and that was our territory. And so even when we came to Macon back in September, there were signs that said, on the marquees and in the city, saying "Welcome home," pretty much. And we've never had that warm of a welcome before, outside of just the park. So it's been good. It really feels like everybody is acknowledging, accepting us, and welcoming us back.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm also just curious what I guess sort of the extent to what I guess that looks like across the nation, because you mentioned the bike ride, and some of the cultural celebration that only happens, I guess, once a year. So I'm wondering, as the Muscogee Nation that you represent, sort of for your work, what that and even folks you work with, like that, what that looks like on I guess on that kind of scale, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it really is kind of a yearly type of event. But I know Chief Hill's administration and even Chief Lloyd, so probably the last 8 years has really been coming to Georgia and to Macon, to Ocmulgee, probably like every other month, doing business and collaborating. There are efforts to put a cultural center in Macon and to actually have, you know, a physical representation of our people back in Georgia, which would be really awesome. So we've been working with designing this new cultural center, what it might look like, what are the kind of elements, what parts of the history do we want to tell. So we really have some great things coming into play that I think is going to expand our footprint and help educate people on the history. You know, you know, one of the times we came out, somebody asked, well, why did y'all leave? And really had no idea, you know, the history of the forced removal. And, you know, we didn't want to leave. And we're grateful to come back and see these lands every time we get a chance. You know, but yeah, I would say, you know, on a monthly, quarterly basis is really where we're at right now, but there is hopes and goals to have some kind of permanent presence.
Right. Yeah, I think that was sort of kept in mind just on our experience as a team in the physical space, but I'm excited to see sort of what that turns into through those constant conversations. So my next question I have is, so I guess you touched on this a little bit, but what is really the significance for Muscogee people to return to their homelands? Like, what does that mean? What does that look like?
You know, for me, it's very important, but I will tell you that there are many feelings and perspectives and attitudes in the nation and the tribe. You know, we have over 90,000 citizens. And so you can imagine that not everybody agrees on everything. And there are some people who would say, you know, we're not supposed to go back there. Or, you know, that elders have said, we're supposed to continue to look to the future where we are now. And, you know, the way I look at that and the way you know, feel about that is that I think what they were saying is don't go move back necessarily, or don't try to restart our culture there or our towns there. We've already moved them here, you know, but I think that in terms of cultural preservation, we have a responsibility, you know, knowing that our ancestors have been dug up and that they're still out there. You know, it's really hard to sit here and not think of that or not try to get them back. And that's where I think the tribal government is encouraging us to do everything we can to try to get them back and try to protect what we have left. And we've been gone so long, people forgot that we even exist. People have forgotten that we're still alive, that we're still here. And so for educational purposes, you know, it's really important that we come back, you know, but it's not just for educating the local community, but I think it's important for our citizens to come back and see the monumental places that are still there and that have been preserved. You know, I want our youth to be able to come back and feel inspired and feel a connection, seeing how beautiful these artifacts are, seeing you know, the mounds, you know, that we come from people that were very strong and powerful. You know, that in itself can help inspire future generations to continue, you know, to not feel alone or to not feel proud of who you are. And so I think those are things that are benefits to coming back and seeing things. You know, unfortunately, though, it's not easy not everyone can afford to come back or have had the opportunity. But then things are not easily found on the landscape, you know, and so I think that's something we want to work on, is trying to provide a travel guide or a list of places people should go see that are accessible and that they can visit, so that if they do get a chance, that they can feel connected and learn more about our tribal history by visiting certain places, you know, while they're in the area. So we really want to help facilitate more homeland trips for our youth, for our community, and give them that experience and opportunity to see how beautiful the lands are. I tell you, it just looks so different than Oklahoma.
Thanks for sharing that. And just seeing sort of the different perspectives, it sort of made me think of this, the concept of Sankofa, like looking in the past to sort of bringing that into the future, and sort of what it seems like as the nation, the cultural preservation department in particular is really building on what that vision looks like for the entire nation community. I mean, all the different sort of the different perspectives on what that can be shaped in. Yeah, so I will, yeah, move that to the next question. So what is, and this maybe also came up a little bit during that previous, some of the previous conversations with other folks in the nation that we've been able to have conversations around, but what does that, the experience working across state lines and some of that process look like to specifically to reclaim land? And then also media uses the term out of state when referring to Muscogee Nation of Oklahoma's land reclamation pursuits. And so how do you personally connect to that out of state term?
You know, was not aware they use that term, but it is, you know, disappointing because they don't know the true history to say that. I mean, I think there's way better ways, or if we were given opportunity, we would have tried to provide even, you know, we have a press secretary for the nation, and we operate, you know, very similar to the United States government, where we could have helped with any kind of quote that was in the media, you know, to try to help explain the cultural context of things. But, you know, it's been a challenge. I think people don't know enough about tribes in Georgia, and so they treat us as special interest groups, and don't really understand what our motives or intentions are worried. You know, what does it mean? Are they going to move? Are they all going to move back? Are they going to build a casino? What are they? What do they want? What do they want to do? But you know, we have successfully reclaimed land in Georgia, not too far from Macon, Georgia, within 10 miles of the mounds. We acquired a property, and it's 120 acres. And we're in the process of getting it surveyed archaeologically. We want to know where, you know, the cultural areas are versus other areas, and see what potential there is to develop, not develop, but have educational opportunity to have public access to the land. You know, I imagine maybe trails or something similar to the way you all are utilizing the land you have. But also, this land is a very unique. It has a really high point in the county, and has really long drops, and may not be the best land suited for any kind of development, which is fine. But the main thing is preservation. A lot of the land in the Ocmulgee River corridor is undeveloped, and we want to keep it that way. But we do see that there are sustainable ways to create access and recreation that are not necessarily going to, you know, harm the environment and cause destruction of cultural sites. So, but really, you know, preservation and conservation is the key there with these lands. And but as soon as we purchased the land, you know, it was kind of like, okay, you got to pay your taxes now. And you know, whereas in Oklahoma, you know, it's a little bit different, or there's different land statuses of tribes when they purchase land. This would be our first time putting this land into trust outside of Oklahoma or outside of our reservation. And so we're working with different agencies and trying to see how we can, make it work. When the land is put into trust, it means that it has ultimate protection in that kind of status, and we want it to be in that way for cultural preservation and protection of the land, so that a pipeline could never go through there. There couldn't be eminent domain. If the community says we need to have a power line go through here, it's for the betterment of the community. If it's in trust, they can't do eminent domain. And it really gives the tribe sovereign power over that land. State laws don't apply on that land. And in that status, we don't pay taxes on it either. And so I think, everything is kind of new and moving in that direction. But I think there have been some challenges with people in the state wondering what we're doing or what our intent is. But really, we want to see Georgia's first national park come into fruition. We want to see the Ocmulgee Mounds National Historical Park expand 50 miles south to become Georgia's first national park and reserve. And that's kind of the effort in trying to acquire more lands in that region, is to help that initiative of expanding the park. So I think that kind of answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. And with the trust structure, would you see that, or would the nation see that as some sort of land back in that preservation, or would that sort of term kind of like ring a different bell for
Oh
you?
yeah, that would definitely be land back.
What's
Hashtag
that?
land back. And we have to go through the Bureau of Indian Affairs to get that designation. And some lands, even in Oklahoma, have taken 7 years to get through the like legal structure and process of getting that approved.
Mm.
And it goes all the way up to the president, and it takes a long time, but it's something that we're starting the process and hope to see it happen.
Okay. And so again, I'm kind of going back to the Okmulgee celebration just because that's very clear in my memory, but the Department of Interior representative, would she play a role in that as well, through the federal?
Yes, the Department of the Interior is houses the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which manages all tribal land that's in that status. And so, yeah, she would definitely be the one to sign off on it, if it happened that quickly, or if she gets to serve another term.
I see. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for sharing. So how have the Muscogee natives of Oklahoma maintained ties to the Muscogee living in the Southeast of the U.S.?
Well, Muscogee people and Seminole people are very close culturally and linguistically. Our people pretty much speak a very similar language. It's in the same language family, but we speak the Creek Seminole dialect. And there are many Seminoles out in Florida. There are actually, I think, 3 Seminole tribes that are based in Florida today. And then we have Seminole Nation of Oklahoma, who are our neighbors here. And so, they're very close kinship there. And so, there's a lot of, I would say, partnerships and folks communicating through the Seminole channels, because we're so culturally connected. You see a lot of intermarriage between the groups, and a lot of the same cultural events and things like that. And today there are no federally recognized tribes in Georgia. It's a state that doesn't have them anymore, same as Tennessee. And what's interesting is that they have, Georgia has a council on Native American concerns. That's a board that has been appointed by the governor to assist in Native American affairs for the state. And so, we are not sure exactly what the board does other than under state law. If there are human remains found on private lands, that they are consulted and have a say-so in what happens to them. And I believe that the members on this board maybe have Native American ancestry and may come from state recognized tribes. And so, you know, there is a difference between state and federal recognition. Federal recognition is something where you have to prove that your tribe existed, you know, pretty much, and negotiated with the United States and had treaties, that you have membership, that you have a tribal government, that you have a culture, that you have language. And tribes can apply to become federally recognized if they're a state tribe or state group. And so, you know, one thing I will say is that we know that there are state groups in Georgia, but you know, it's a big difference because a lot of them claim Muscogee ancestry, and we're not saying that they're not Native American, but they're not citizens of the Muscogee Nation and our tribal government. And our tribal government, you know, negotiated with the first president of the United States and the Treaty of New York. And we have fought for these lands and have many of our people died fighting for those lands. And we were forcibly removed. And we feel that all the Muscogee people came to us to Oklahoma, and ones that stayed denounced their tribal membership. And we're no longer Native in terms of the government. And so it's a complicated history, you know, but we do understand that there are people who claim to be descendants of Muscogee Nation who remain. You know, when it comes to government relationships and the work that we do in protecting and preserving with federal agencies, you know, the state tribes are not included or not involved. You know, and I really don't know what they do in the state of Georgia. So I just know that there are people who, you know, are state tribes and there are federally recognized tribes. And we've seen how harmful some state groups can be in terms of promoting, you know, parts of our culture that aren't necessarily true. You know, we're not powwow people. You know, our traditional dances are called stomp dance. You know, every citizen can participate in a powwow if they want to. That's their decision. But, you know, when local people turn to them and they're doing more powwow style things, people kind of get misleading. And so we feel it, you know, our true history and culture would come from the federally recognized tribe and representatives from the federal government, you know, the tribal government. And so it's again a little bit complicated, but we I would say our strongest connections in our homelands are the Seminole tribes that are out there.
Thanks. Sort of along those lines, and the sort of the range of tribes that are present that are not necessarily federally recognized within the state of Georgia. Are you familiar with the connection between Muscogee and the Yamasee tribe of coastal Georgia? And if so, what can you share?
Yes, the Yamasee, or the Muscogee word Yamasi, actually means like gentle. And that from what I understand, that they were very gentle people, and that they were Muscogean people, and that their descendants kind of joined the Muscogee Nation, and a lot of their members went on to become Seminole and have been integrated in the Seminole tribe. And you know, archaeologically, we hear a lot about the Yamasee being homelands being in South Carolina, and how they moved down into Georgia and being on the coast. And from what I understand, they're very nomadic people, moving and going, and they had some of the most prime lands when Europeans started coming over. And so they did a lot of negotiating. The Spanish and the British were constantly saying trade with us, and part of the reason was because they did a lot of work to help clear the lands and make them farmable. And so the Europeans wanted those lands because they didn't have to do as much work by cutting down trees and, trying to prepare the land to live and have plantations. And so they really wanted the Yamasee land. But today, a lot of people say the Yamasee are extinct or the Gwali are extinct. And, we believe that they're still alive and that they're descendants and they're a part of the Muscogee and Seminole people. They may not have a distinct group or government themselves, but they intermarried and were pretty much, their bloodlines became part of the Muscogee and Seminole people. And there are oral histories today that still talk about the Yamasee and them, being a part of us. So it's a neat history there. I do understand that there might be state recognized groups of Yamasees today. But yeah, there are connections to us, and they're but we would consider them to be Muskogean speaking people and be distant relatives of our people.
Thanks for sharing. I think that's somewhat significant, particularly with the I guess, Afro-Indigenous heritage and sort of connections with that across the East Coast too. Some more history with that, but I'd love to sort of, I guess, delve into that conversation more at another time too. I'm sure there's a lot as far as the Yamasee and other, Yamasee and other related tribes. There's other sort of connections and extensions that, as a part of that history, that come out of that. But I do want to shift a little bit to some of your background again. As you know, we at WAWA focus on environmental education, and you do have that science background, environmental science background, with botany training, and along those lines, we see that that alignment with our stewardship of the space, and particularly our work with restoring the old growth forest. And you're familiar with the native flora, native fauna of the Southeast, or if you could share what you are particularly familiar with. And then are you also familiar with the cultural practices of the Muscogee living in the Piedmont region? And yeah, please share your knowledge with us. Thank you.
Yeah, I started off, definitely being environmentalist and studying science. And, I ended up being more into cultural and historian unexpectedly. I knew, studying environmental was important to me because I seen, how environmental justice can play out for communities that don't have a voice, and really working to protect sacred sites, even as a young person, a teenager, fighting for some wetlands that were located close to my school, and how the city, didn't listen to us, didn't care. And even if we had elders who talked about how important these lands were, and because they didn't have a degree, because they didn't have letters behind their name, that their voice didn't matter. And I thought to myself, I need to be the scientific expert person who can say something and help stand up for our community. And so I thought, I'm going to take every science class I can and study as much as I can to kind of be an eco warrior at the time. And I tell you, it was tough for me when I went to graduate school. It was very competitive environment, and academia can be tough to navigate, and you have to really self-promote. And like I said, the competition part I just didn't like too much, but I wanted to stick it through and do what I could, and I wanted to learn everything they knew so then I could bring it home to my community. And in reality, what that ended up being was I taught biology at the Tulsa Community College for a couple years, and tried to bring in, the importance of, the environment and sustainability. And I saw a job opening with the tribe to be the librarian, and that's kind of how I got converted over. And, to me, cultural resources are natural resources. And so, fighting for these special places, whether you call them wetlands or you call them old growth forests, they also have cultural connections. And to me, it was a way to try to bridge that gap and bring these things together. And so I was kind of in the right place at the right time to help with this work. And I do think the scientific background helps me in reviewing projects and also understanding archaeology, because that's a big part of our job, is to understand what reports the archaeologists have written and what artifacts they're finding and what they mean. And they're very much a scientific report that I was used to reading, and so I could find my way through it. But the but there's stuff missing, and I think that there still needs to be more work between the environmental side and the cultural side of things. And I think it would be awesome to try to do a type of plant survey on your land that you guys are stewards of, to see what species are there, what are the tree species, and what are some of the plants. And just knowing those can help tell a story too about the landscape. And I think it would be really neat to work with you all and trying to do some of that work, but for Muscogee people, I think that this region, or the Piedmont, is important. So much of our pottery and the clays near the water systems were prime location in the state. And actually, the Lamar Mounds, which are south of Ocmulgee Mounds, are some of the first potteries that archaeologists found, and they named all the pottery Lamar after this huge deposit of clays that made very high quality pottery that sustained life. Pottery was used to have vessels to cook food and to carry water, and you got to have a nice recipe to have pots that don't break. And the indigenous knowledge and science, and technology behind these pots, also the type of technique they were using to decorate them. There's an example of Swift Creek pottery that they would take a wooden paddle and carve designs into it and then stamp it onto the wet clay, which creates a really neat design and a very innovative way of decorating these pots. But also they would mix shell or sand, a type of timber, in with the clay to make sure that when you fire this clay, that it doesn't blow up. If you get bubbles or air bubbles in it, it can break. And so they spent so much time developing the knowledge and understanding of how to use the resources to help sustain life. And I think even the tree species, certain woods were used for certain cultural tools or different games. And so but the thing is that you don't really see the impact on the landscape because, they were always respectful. I mean, that's part of our cultural teachings is don't take the last of something. You got to leave some to replenish. And so, you don't really see the impact necessarily, but you can find all these pieces of broken pottery left at some of the sites, which help identify, where our people were located and everything. But, in an area and how to control weeds and organic weed management and fresh market tomato production. But having these communities involved in that, I mean, I love to hear that. I'm really excited to learn more about how we might be able to be involved in some of the work you're doing, because I think that that's the same thing we try to do here, or efforts that we need to do here, on a community-based level, help provide, help get people back outside. I think that that's been a disconnect for so many. We used to be outside all the time, and we need to go back and reconnect, to Mother Nature. And I think you're going to get a sense of so much of replenishment, not just for, and unity and kids stronger, and less reliance on, unsustainable practices, and more empowerment to families. So, I don't know if I answered that exactly, but, I think it would be great to see what kind of, cultural resources or important plants or opportunities there could be for gathering on the land that you guys are stewards of, might be a way to help the nation, reconnect.
We, in the beginning of the introduction, how I think a lot of what you said did align with our mission, our vision, how we connect to the space, and sort of what the work looks like, as far as, so I mentioned we steward the 26 natures, but we kind of scale the space, the overall space, as the everything happens in the watershed. We steward the 3 watersheds, and the watershed within the old growth forest where we currently are is the Utoy Creek, but there's also Proctor Creek and Sandy Creek, and together within sort of the quality of the water, and even sort of, again, like the ecological background of the space, sort of doing those surveys, while we have maybe some, we have the educational background, maybe some of us have letters behind our name, but we kind of have that kind of like connection to science. And in the same vein, we also value community knowledge, and what residents of the 3 watersheds sort of bring into the space, and that participatory based research. And so I think I'm also excited about sort of like the potential for community science in, the creeks, connecting out of the Chattahoochee River, but essentially the 3 creeks of the watershed that we serve, and then finding what that survey, how that aligns to some of the natural or the native flora and fauna of Muscogee Creek, and that the value there. And then also, kind of in my memory again from the celebration there, I got excited when you were talking about the pottery with the stamping, because I remember there was someone on that tour that sort of did their own sort of panning in Proctor Creek and found artifacts, but they weren't technically verified, but they kind of reflect sort of how you described that with the patterns, and I just thought they were beautiful, and the different techniques around that, and kind of even, I think that can be even a connecting point to placekeeping, as far as sharing the techniques around that and bringing that back, and the restorative nature of respect we all have as environmental stewards of the space, and how to really be sustainable in those practices, with how we interact with either removing clay from along the stream bed, but still utilizing that in other environmental practices across as an organization, again, since you mentioned the pottery, I did want to highlight, and I'll do this at the end, but highlight that we'll have a Ivory on our team is running a clay pottery workshop as a part of this celebration, well, this month, Indigenous Peoples Month and Peoples Week. So yeah, I did see something in the chat, but I also have, oh yeah, okay, so other questions, yeah, I do have a couple others in case, but I'll pause for a second to see if anyone has thoughts.
Janelle, I put that in there just to kind of get questions going, but feel free to do your last couple questions and we'll see if we get any questions from the audience.
Sounds good. So, WAWA helps us steward 3 green spaces on Muscogee land. And, I discussed going beyond land acknowledgement in an effort to return land to Muscogee Creek people and support local native-led initiatives. And you spoke of the trust structure as far as attaining that 120 acres, I believe you said, to the south of Macon, Georgia. But in addition to that, how can organizations such as ours, maybe others with access to land, be in solidarity to the Muscogee Nation?
I think just letting us come visit or inviting us to come would be great. The way you described the properties, I think it'd be great for us to come out, and we got, people who know plants and, could just walk the land and really get a sense of so many things by doing that. But I think that there could be opportunities for gathering, if and not necessarily like taking whole trees, but there could be opportunities that there are important or types of plants there that might be something that the tribe would like to see about harvesting sustainably, or for cultural, or for also for crafts. There are many when we work with federal agencies, any type of gathering or collecting is kind of hard to do, and you have to get a permit, and it's a lengthy application and approval process, and so sometimes it hinders people from actually going and doing it. Like we are always looking for river cane, because it doesn't grow that well here, and there's only very few places. And so there are many efforts to try to establish river cane here, but we use that to make blow darts. We use it to make baskets, and having another potential source of a place to find that would be great to know about. But another thing I think is, and I don't know the status of y'all's property, but putting things into a restrictive covenant or into conservation easements that will keep that land protected, from development in the future. I think that would be great to see, because, unfortunately, money talks sometimes, and people can be bought out or be tricked into trading lands, or it's tough, I think, sometimes for communities to hold on to places that are important to them if there's big development proposed for an area. If somebody wants to put in a new airport, if they want to put in a new grain elevator or something, they may have those plans without ever even talking to the landowners. And so I think that there are ways maybe to help protect these old growth forests in a way that wouldn't easily be taken. And I'm sure that there are many people thinking of those things already. But I think that would be great to see. I think there could be opportunity for co-management and access. Really, I think access is it would be one of the main things, is that we only go where we're invited, and only go and see places that are open to the public. And so if there are lands or places that might, be important, or you think that might be important to the nation, we would come out and look. But I would say some challenges too, we talked about before, is that when we're involved, people tend to raise the price because they think that we have a lot of money. And there have been mound sites that people were willing to sell to us, but when we got involved, it went up 50% higher than it was listed. And so it gets kind of tricky sometimes to maybe we need a third party to do those kind of negotiations for us, and things like that. But yeah, those are just a few ideas.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I did want to say that we are on City of Atlanta property, so that's the official owner. And then I'm also so we can maybe have conversations in the future sort of about I guess what that looks like. But I'm also I know very little about co-management. So maybe do you have an example of what that looks like? And maybe in Oklahoma they've
Yeah,
dabbled.
so it's something we're also looking at, doing with the Park Service, if they're, when then we get our first national park in Georgia. But really what it means is to be at the table when planning and making decisions about management of the land or future use. And it may not be that we can be at every meeting, but at least, it's really committing to keeping one another apprised. And I envision it being like having a tribal member, a representative from the Muscogee Nation on a board, or somebody who meets annually with the organization to get updates and to hear about things that are going on, just so that you always have that tribal perspective as a part of decision making and planning and stewardship efforts. So I think that that might be a way to start type of co-management or co-stewardship, and building a relationship. Ultimately, it's building relationships with one another, but kind of solidifying it in terms of having some kind of cooperative agreement, or committing to having regular meetings and discussions with each other about how things are being done.
Okay, thank you for some more context on that. The final question I had was really sort of an extension of the previous question, as far as what other folks can do to be in solidarity with the Muscogee Creek Nation, and what can people do on their journey, in particular to the Muscogee Creek Nation's journey to return to their homelands and protect their culture.
I would say, invite us, welcome us. Those are, I do think a land acknowledgement is important, because it sets the tone in terms of understanding all the stakeholders that are in the community, whether they are in state or out of state, and there's so much history on the land, and in history after we left, which is great to hear, that is also being preserved. And so this is a special place to many generations of people, and important to so many that I think just understanding and acknowledging those histories and those stakeholders goes a long way. And so I would say that being more active in the land acknowledgement, like you mentioned early on, is really good. But I think don't be afraid to reach out to us. Like I said, that we may not be able to be a part of day-to-day planning and activities, but we would like to support each other or one another in any way that we can, especially when we have similar goals in mind or we're working towards the same, type of outcomes. So having seminars like this is great. This is awesome that celebrating Native American History Month and helping educate people, because a lot of things that I talked about today are not in a textbook. They're not taught in K through 12 school system, unfortunately. And so I feel like you guys have really done your due diligence to try to help educate the community and the organization on just the history that's kind of been overlooked.
Thank you so much, RaeLynn. I really appreciated sort of like the breadth and wealth of knowledge that you were able to share today. And I really hope that this will be the first of, several conversations and lecture series that we'll have throughout the years to come, and, beginning of this partnership as well. So appreciate your time again. And I also want to, uplift Anna Marie, who's sort of behind the scenes with connecting this all together. And of course, the folks who were able to come out tonight. And before we wrap it up, I do want to extend one more arm to see if there are any questions. We have about 30 minutes to sort of gauge any other interests and things. Thank you,
Thanks,
Shantae.
Janelle.
I think
All
Mallory
right, there
might
is one
pop out.
question.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, it looks like we just got some folks just giving gratitude
Oh,
for
okay.
putting this on. I did have a question around so there's a amusement park here called Six Flags. It's a franchise. There's several throughout the nation. The one here is there's information or word out that there was a mound or at least some kind of sacred grounds at Six Flags before Six Flags the land was purchased and turned into an amusement park. I'm curious if you're familiar at all with that that sacred land, and if there is any kind of reconciliation that Six Flags may be interested or invested in participating in, because I think what has been shared is that the land was never surveyed before. Once the land was purchased by the owners of Six Flags, it was never surveyed or kind of looked over from an archaeological standpoint to see if there were any sacred artifacts, or anything to kind of recover. And I'm just curious if the nation has any knowledge of that sacred ground, and if there's any work or connections to the owners of the land and Six Flags at all to try to, at minimum, maybe be able to do some kind of study of that space.
That's a really good question. I have also heard that, and I know people call it the Six Flags site, and and we heard about it from local archaeologists that said, yeah, there's stuff there at Six Flags, and that we need to look into it. And I do think that the tribe did, before I worked here, and I wasn't sure exactly what was found there, if there were burials, what happened, who has the collection now, are they at a university? Has there been research done on them? And those are questions I'm not too sure, but you are correct in that I have also heard too that there was a Native American site there, and that they found during the development of the park. And we have driven by several times, and I've thought about it too, because it seems like right when you're going into Atlanta, that part always is backed up with traffic, and you're just sitting there watching those people on the roller coaster, like, what did they find? But I will look into that more to try to see if I can find out if there was, any kind of salvage of things, or if things did really kind of go down in that way where they didn't fully survey, and that's the hard part too, is that on private lands, the law doesn't apply on doing these surveys. There has to be a federal nexus, whether it's federal land or federal dollars, grant money, things like that, that triggers these laws. And so if it's on private land, then the Georgia state law would come into play, and they don't have very strong rules in the state about if you find artifacts or how many. And then that's where, even if they find burials, that's when they contact that Georgia council. But now, recently, through some of the work we've been doing with the state, because the state receives federal funds, when the state's involved with Native American human remains, then it kind of triggers NAGPRA. And the Georgia Attorney General had made an opinion that did agree that once the state takes custody of the remains, the NAGPRA applies and the tribes can get them back. And so that's pretty new, and it's something that kind of gives us a little bit more of a voice on these private lands. There are other I would say bad actors who have probably developed sites without letting anybody know, so it's a tough. But yeah, I did hear about the Six Flags area before.
Okay, thanks for sharing. And it didn't look like we had any additional questions, so Janelle, if you
Yeah,
want
I
to go
think
ahead and
that,
wrap it.
yeah, I think that's just about it. Yeah, and actually at the time, incorrect, 7:30 is the wrap up. But I do appreciate it once again, everyone, for showing up. Thank you again to RaeLynn Butler for your time, and yeah, this wonderful conversation. And I know I still have a lot of other follow-up questions, so I know there'll be hopefully an opportunity to continue the conversation in different ways.